Hello, everybody. Tara here with a Wifey Wake Up podcast and getting a bit of a late start today for a number of reasons. One of them, primarily, we're getting a snowstorm here on October 31st in Minnesota, which is very reminiscent to any of you who are from Minnesota, lived through the era of our great blizzard. I believe it was in 1991. Yes, I had to mention it. It was a lot of fun. So the power has been going in and out, and therefore the internet. So hopefully we'll be good to go from here. So today's topic is why sharing marriage problems with friends might be hurting your relationship. Now, it's important to mention I based what I'm sharing with you on almost 24 years of marriage now. And these are things that I would have scoffed at even 5 years ago, even 10 years ago. And so if that's where you feel right now, I don't blame you. Okay. I know it's uncomfortable. It doesn't feel right. Why wouldn't you bring all your stuff to your friends? That's what you've done for years, right? And it seems to work well. But I'm going to tell you why, and why not doing that not only will help prevent strife in your relationship, but also may help prevent a divorce. And so with that, let's go ahead. So I think most of us women will admit, whether we really like it or not, that we process verbally, right? That when we have something going on, that we want to talk it through. And I think we've all, if you've been married for a while and been in long-term relationships, we've all or he's cutting you off and saying, do this, do that. And you're like, no, I just wanted to talk about it. Just needed to get off my chest. And he's like, well, I'm giving you a solution. Why don't you implement the solution? This is how you take care of it. And it's the classic trope, right, of how men and women are different and therefore interact differently and handle things differently. And that's all well and good, and that's fine. We know that that's just the way we are, right? But it's important to know when that's okay and when that will not actually be helpful. And where, in my opinion and my experience, that will not be helpful is when you take your marriage problems to your girlfriends. And that might be your bestie. It could be your bestie. It could be your mom, your sister. It could even be your hairstylist, because that's where you ended up for the day. But the thing is that your bestie, let's just take your bestie, for example, your sister, your mom, especially too, you want them to take your side, right? That's like the definition of a bestie, is that they're like, I got your back. And no matter what, they're like, you're right. This is, you go girl, or that sounds good. I remember, for example, not too long ago, I had a woman betray me, and I told my bestie the story. She actually knew this person, but very briefly. So she knew more of this person, and she's like, "Oh, I kind of was suspicious of that person." But anyways, when I was telling her the story, because it was all resolved, it wasn't like something that I needed a solution for. It's just like, when you're just really upset and just have all sorts of emotions going through you, and you just want to talk to your bestie and kind of, get that, oh, that really stinks. And she did that. She's wonderful. And she even put the cherry on top. Now, there may be some judgment on this one, but I was thrilled that my sweet bestie, who, forgive me if my bestie, if this, I hope this satisfies her. For me to describe her real briefly, I would say like she's a modern flower child in a way. And she's just wonderful. But when her response was to me telling the story, how this woman betrayed me, she's like, oh, I could just punch her. And I was like, yes, that's my bestie. And that's how I think we need our besties. There are times, yes, we need them to say, hey, have you considered this? And to do, let's see, yep, our power is going in and out. And that's kind of my point too, is that she's going to be on your side, which is wonderful, right? You want that, but you need someone who can also tell you where your flaws are. And that's not always your bestie. And Also, if you're bringing your relationship problems to your bestie, your mom, your sister, so forth, they're hearing your version of the story, right? They're not hearing the whole story. And no matter how much you think that you're sharing the whole truth and nothing but the truth, you're always sharing your version of the story. And so they, by default, can't give you good feedback. Plus, if you socialize with them in any way, you're tainting their view of your husband. And usually in those social gatherings, we cannot help but kind of exude certain feelings, if not looks, towards that person if we've been given a different viewpoint of them. And of course, we're siding with our bestie, right? Our sister, or so forth. And so those are a couple of the primary reasons why it's not a good idea, even if it's a natural instinct in us women to go to our sisters of various sorts to unload, to release, or even seek advice. Why that's not such a good idea. Because if for all those reasons, right? I have a tendency to repeat myself. So if those weren't clear, let me know. But revisit those, maybe watch this again. So this also is a great complement to podcasts 59, 60, and 62. Did a little bit of a jump there. And will help explain a little bit of that as well. So it may feel like, okay, Tara, so if you're suggesting that I don't go to my bestie, my sister, my mom, my hairstylist, or even your mother-in-law. My husband actually initially welcomed me to talk about things that were frustrating me in life and in a period of life. I mentioned in several podcasts, certain frustrations or frustrating Okay, I think we're back. It wasn't like I was constantly having problems. It was more like a dark night of the soul by our modern definition. And so my husband suggested, well, why don't you go to my mom, who when John and I got married, we connected right away. His parents treat me like family, and just as best a relationship that you could wish for. And so he thought, okay, here's, an elder woman that she can go to. He trusts his mother, of course. And, but what it turned into is, of course, and we women, I'll group us all together in the sense, in a way that we tend to connect problems, right? Stuff is connected to each other. There's even a comedian, I forget the name of the comedian. He has an amazing show. He's actually, I believe, a minister that ended up doing comedy and just based on relationships. And he has on stage this model of a brain, and he comically relates how guys compartmentalize, right? This issue is separate from this issue. Brain. And women, it's all connected. And so, of course, I am certain, or just at least relieve the heavy life issues that were going on that were not related to my husband, but of course they are connected, right? And it wasn't that it created a problem between me and my husband. It would have eventually, but it started creating issues between him and his mom. And this is just the example of that can happen in any relationship, right? And so that's just an illustration that even in the best of relationships, his mom adores him, right? And but I was feeding her the difficult situation, right? So what am I suggesting that you do instead? And I hope that was clearly illustrated enough why it's not really a good idea to go to friends and sisters and so forth. And I would even say, if you have groups that you participate with, maybe a church group, maybe it's a bowling league, I don't know. But groups tend to have their own, individuals and groups tend to have their own idea of how things should be and will take sides. And like I mentioned in previous podcasts, 59, 60, and 62, it's really important that when you talk to a counselor in particular or a therapist, that you instruct them that you're wanting solutions and help on how to work within the relationship and that you want to stay in the relationship and make it better if at all possible. If you don't give them those guidelines, they can lead you in whichever direction. But you have to, assuming that's your desire, that you want to stay in the relationship and assuming it's a healthy relationship, you have to give them those instructions so that what the feedback they give you is along those lines. And so same for if you were talking with a friend, a sister, coworker, your hairstylist, they're more than likely going to take your side. And along with not knowing the entire story and so forth, can very easily mislead you. And it's important to remember too that you're going to end up being like the 5 people that you hang out with the most. And so if those people have unhealthy or unsuccessful relationships, are divorced, or can't stay in a healthy relationship or maintain one, then you're more likely to go in that direction as well. And another illustration that I'd like to make is consider that your husband was going to his friend and sharing all the grievances that he has with you. And along with that, of course, usually there's some secrets, right? Maybe he's some personal things about you that you wouldn't want someone to know. And so first of all, would you like that other person to know that information? And second of all, do you think it's likely that he would be, whether he was trying to or not, do you think he would end up relaying your side of the story as well? And third of all, do you think then that friend would be able to give good advice or feedback based upon those biases, right? The bias that he has to have preferential treatment for his friend, and the bias also that he's automatically fed the story that your husband in this hypothetical scenario would be relaying. So flipping the script often can get us to think a little more clearly as well. So you might be thinking, well, Tara, what do I do then? And here's what I would suggest, and here's what I did. Number one, in any scenario in life, there are times where we need to talk things through with someone, but then you have to have the focus. You have to know what kind of solution you're looking for. In particular, this is a different scenario when you're in a marriage than, let's say, having a problem with a coworker, because you can leave that place of work. I'm assuming you're not ready to leave your marriage. I'm assuming in wifey school, we're talking about how do you maintain and create a healthy relationship, or reestablish a healthy relationship for a successful marriage. And when it comes to maybe a dispute you have at work, it's expected that you're going to have career or job changes. So you're going to be so if you're, for example, having an issue at work, talking to different people who might have experience in that area, it is a reasonable way to address that. However, in a marriage, oftentimes you're airing your dirty laundry, right? You're, like I illustrated and ad nauseum at this point, that if you're sharing it with your friends, your sister, your hairstylist, that they're going to side with you. And in a marriage situation, that's not particularly helpful. So what I've done and what I recommend is that, first of all, go to your husband. But you might be thinking, well, that's where the problem is coming from anyways, so that's not going to help. I understand sometimes things need to cool down, you need to sort things out. Generally in life, going to the person who you're having the problem with is ultimately the solution. However, that you might be at a point where that's just stirring up more problems. Second, I would recommend going to a counselor or a therapist, again, with the guidance that, assuming you do want to stay in your relationship, that's how they're guiding you. That's how they're working with you and helping you to find solutions within yourself, where you might be contributing to the problem. There we go. Hopefully we're back. So going to the counselor with that in mind, therefore you get it off your chest and you get solutions. But you might be saying, well, Tara, I can't afford a counselor. And I'm going to say that's a good thing. Many counselors and therapists will work on a sliding scale. And why is that a good thing? Also, because you're going to go into therapy or into the counseling session with a more focused mindset, that you're not just going to unload to relieve yourself. You might do that too, as part of the process, but you're going to go in looking for solutions and want to get things taken care of. So that's actually, I think, much more of a benefit. And it also keeps a counselor from stringing you along, because you're much more likely to say, I need to get through this, in 3 sessions or less. And that can be very helpful. And let them know that I'm trying to work with my husband on this. How can I approach him to more likely get at least conversation going, if not a positive response? How do I work with him to get a resolution on this issue, for example? And last, but certainly not least, you can absolutely pray about it. And I don't mention this often enough, but it's absolutely amazing that when you take the time to talk to God and ask for answers, what can happen? Asking for guidance, asking for grace, that absolutely can help as well. Lastly, you might be thinking, and thank you for hanging in there if you're kind of skeptical about this, because, ladies, I'm sharing this information. I know it's not easy to hear, but what's even harder, what's even more difficult is going through the strife in life to figure it out. I'm trying to give you the short version so they don't have to go through the problems, which are much more difficult than swallowing these ideas. Just consider them for a while before kicking them to the curb, because you may find them to be very useful. But the last point I'd like to make is that you might be thinking, well, gosh, Tara, that is so restrictive. Why would I restrict myself? I have all this wonderful support network around me of people that I could go to. I've gone to them in the past about other issues, for example, that you can go to and talk about working through problems regarding your kids, developmental stages and resources. And that's really helpful. But it's different, right? And what I want to encourage you to do is consider this as a boundary, okay? It's easy to think of boundaries when we think of things that we don't want to let in, right? Like, I had a couple examples here. So, okay, let's start out. I gotta go to my notes so I just stay on track. So you want to, let's say you want to keep the good stuff from spilling out, right? This is one form of a boundary. It's either keeping things out. We're pausing again. You don't give your credit card to just anyone, right? You keep that locked down, right? Because that is a boundary. There are certain people, many people, you don't share your finances or your credit card with, right? And that's an example of a boundary of keeping things in. But sometimes and I think the boundary of keeping things out is very familiar. That's how we typically think of boundaries. Like, I'm not going to let that certain person in my circle, I don't allow that kind of treatment, or behavior around me, for example. But the thing is, what can be very challenging is when we actually don't know what our boundaries should be. And a lot of times these days we're taught to have very open boundaries. And then that's kind, that's polite, but actually it's not healthy for you. And it can be really challenging when we haven't been taught proper boundaries. And sometimes we need to learn the boundaries of what to keep in as well and not let in. And what I mean by that is if you're letting out, they call it airing your dirty laundry, right? All of your stuff, you're opening up that boundary. You're opening it up for other people to come in and participate in your marriage. Really, okay, I'm going to say that again. When you air your dirty laundry and you talk about your issues, no matter who it is, you are opening the doorway for them to come into your marriage. And your marriage is supposed to be between you and your husband, and at the most, you, your husband, and God. And so that is a boundary that is not often talked about and emphasized or protected. And so that's what I'm trying to illustrate is be very, very careful of who you open up to and allow into your marriage. There may be times where you bring in someone to seek their guidance and their counsel, but it's best done, first of all, it has to be done assuming you want solutions for your marriage, right? So you want to stay in your marriage. They have to be on board with that. And it really should be in agreement with the two of you as a couple. If you do go to a counselor, like I mentioned in the last podcast, you have to go in with a sense of not how do I fix him, but how do I better communicate, how to better relay how to get better results, and ask for strategies in communicating with him rather than trying to get him to fix things and be a certain way, because ultimately it comes down to you two and having to communicate with one another and getting to the solution. And really, usually it's just there are other issues that are standing in the way. Okay, so I am running the risk of repeating myself because I feel like I know these points are so foreign in our lives these days, in our marriages, which I think is why so many marriages end in divorce. And if I'm going to repeat myself if I don't cut it off here, but if this irritates you, I encourage you to take a break and listen to it again. If this kind of is like makes you curious, again, I would listen to it again and take notes. And most of all, give it a try. I mean, there's really nothing to lose by giving it a try and cutting off, creating a boundary that you've opened up, closing that off and allowing only you and your husband in your relationship, like I said, and God, of course. All right, we're back. Well, I'm going to cut it off because I'm getting cut off. So please like, comment, subscribe. I'm sure there's going to be some good comments for this one. And share this with a friend who you think it might be helpful for, who comes to mind in particular. And there's help below in the description. Also, if you're like, I don't know where to start, oh my goodness, this is too much. I'm available for coaching. You can check that out below. And if this information you're finding it helpful, I have a tip jar there as well. And I would love to use that to take my best buddy, which is my husband, out for coffee, out for lunch or dinner. And thanks in advance. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and take care. Bye-bye.